thanks very much for joining us for episode 44 of InTek Freight and Logistics, the podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter, joined by my co-host for this edition, InTek President Shelly Austin. Hi, Shelly.
Hi, Kevin.
And on this episode, we are turning our attention to the ports, but not of the oceanfront variety, as we welcome Jody Peacock, CEO of Ports of Indiana. Jody, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So let's start a little bit. You've been with Ports of Indiana for quite a while. Tell us about your background there and what your job is now day to day.
Sure. It's a little bit of everything. I've been with the ports for over 23 years now and worn a lot of different hats. The most recent CEO, I was named CEO in February of 23 and have been engaged in the last 18 months or so in a pretty significant transformation of the organization. We've essentially doubled staff during that time and are taking on some new initiative that we just have never really been able to consider before. And it's a pretty exciting time for us. We're seeing a tremendous amount of growth and we're taking on some surprising projects maybe that people didn't think we could do with containers, looking at new facilities around the state, expanding our rail capacity. So it's very exciting times right here at Ports of Indiana.
So Jody, you got to tell me, because a lot of people outside of what we do every day, they think port, they think ocean, right? So tell us how there's an international port in Indiana, in good old Hoosier State.
Yeah,
so explain
sure.
that a little bit.
Yeah, and I would argue there are 3 international ports. So all of our ports are very much international in their shipping capacity. I believe last count, we ship cargo to or from 31 different countries in all 50 states. So we have connections throughout the globe. And so if you look at a map or you think of Indiana, you think of Crossroads of America, and you don't see that maritime connection because we're here in Indianapolis, where look out the window and we're 2 hours from water in all directions. But you forget we have Lake Michigan on our northern boundary, and the Ohio River on our southern boundary. So all told, we have over 350 miles of navigable waterways along our state's boundary, and those are pretty critical inland waterways. People say Crossroads of America, man, you're 500 miles from an ocean. That must be difficult to build ports. And I would argue it's the reverse. It's a strategic advantage for us to be so far from the coast and have robust ports moving cargo to and from the heartlands. So if you think of it another way, we can bring an ocean vessel in all the way to Indiana, and it doesn't have to stop at the coast. It can move large volumes of cargo into the Northwest Indiana, greater Chicago market. We can also transload ocean vessels in the Gulf of Mexico and bring cargo up the inland river system. And we're in a reverse, or we can put Indiana grain or Indiana manufactured goods on barges and float them down to New Orleans for transload to ocean vessels or for export through the Great Lakes. So the Great Lakes and the inland river system really are massive freight corridors for our U.S. economy. And, they're 2 of the busiest inland waterways in the world. It's about 200 million tons a year on the Great Lakes and about 600 million tons a year on the inland waterway system. So we have some pretty interesting connections that really allow Indiana to do things that other states can't do. If you look at Indiana as a state, we rank 13th in the nation in waterborne shipping, and that's ahead of many coastal states, which people find hard to believe.
Yeah, even me. I mean, I've been in this industry for how long, and in Indiana, and it fascinates me as well. So, what is one of the most common commodities that you mentioned agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned the grain and those, but I also, when I looked at your website, I saw a lot about steel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, it goes with the territory. Indiana, that's what Indiana does well. We produce more than 27% of the nation's steel. And so obviously we're going to be a part of that. So we operate on all sides of the steel production world. We bring in raw materials and we ship out finished products. A lot of our what we do is handle specialty types of steel, maybe niche steels that aren't produced here or that have special conditions, special types of treatment. But we also have the companies that process the steel located at our ports. And so if you think about what ports do, essentially they're bringing in a lot of raw materials for a value add component. So we operate as a landlord. We have 2,800 acres of land, and we have companies that locate at our port that want to bring in, let's say, a certain kind of steel or a certain kind of mineral. And then they're going to take that product in their facility at our port, process it, turn it into something else, and then they're going to use our barges, our ships, our rail, our highways to ship that same that value add product back out to the regional markets. So we're a key cog in the supply chain. And I think the nice thing that ports can bring is it's not just maritime. We have a large volume of our cargo moves by rail and by truck. And the value that we bring is if a company locates at one of our ports, they have all those options right there at their fingertips. They're plug and play. They don't have to build a dock. They don't have to build a rail bridge over a highway. They don't have to build an interstate. They can just plug into our existing ports infrastructure and they are good to go on day one.
So you mentioned the container piece a little bit. Tell us more about what's going on now with that expansion into the container arena.
Yeah, this is groundbreaking stuff. I mentioned we were making some inroads into new. This is the next frontier for ports of Indiana and the state of Indiana. So we have 3 ports. We do 12.5 million tons of cargo a year, and we don't move any containers today, not one. And that's, if you know much about logistics, obviously, containers are kind of the one cargo that's easily transferable between all modes. It's a standardized shipping container, and it works that way. It is probably 2/3 of maritime cargo moves in containers, and it's the fastest growing mode of freight transportation and highest value. So you look at maybe a value of a container shipment, it might be 4 times the value of typical cargo, a general cargo we would handle today. So you think about, if you're moving a container full of iPhones, that can be a pretty valuable shipment. So for us, this is a chance to get into a component of the freight industry that we've just never been in before. And it started with a federal request. We had to get federal approval from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection in order to operate a facility at Burns Harbor. And within customs, they have regions that they control, and it's very much localized regions, more so than a national framework. But we had to get approval from Chicago's customs office and director, and we had not been able to do that before. But this past year in June, we received our formal approval, and so we are now able to build Indiana's first ever sea cargo container port on Lake Michigan. And it's think, oh, we're just going to add a few more cargoes. What's interesting here is if you think of the whole country's container market as different cities as on the scale of ports, you think of LA or Long Beach as being the biggest ports. But if you thought of the city of Chicago or the market of Chicago as a port, it would handle more containers every year than ports of LA and Long Beach combined. And so what we're offering here is not just Indiana's first container terminal, but the only all-water container route into Chicago. And that's something that's, I think, piqued a lot of people's interest. We launched an Indiana Container Initiative within the ports of Indiana. Our commission approved it. And this was our chance to say we're all in. It's not an easy task. It's going to be a hard lift. The economics are challenging. We have seasonality on the Great Lakes that make this really difficult, but we're committed. We're all in. And then we got customs approval. And then right after that, Port of Antwerp Bruges agreed to establish a partnership with us. And we signed an MOU in their office in Antwerp. And they're going to work with us to develop containers and some other economic development projects and sustainability initiatives for Great Lakes shipping. So momentum is building. I think people realize that we've tapped into something here. If you're a container shipper, you're constantly looking for better ways to move your product. You're looking for, is there a faster, a cheaper, or a better way? We've had customers tell us they stopped shipping products by water into the U.S. because the truck haul from the coast to Indianapolis was causing damage on their product. And I said, well, what if we were able to ship that product around the coast all the way into Indiana by water, and then you only had a short haul to your final destination? And that's got people thinking. It could have economic value. It certainly saves money versus, let's say, they went to air freight. But the other thing that we're exploring is that maritime shipping, be it on the rivers or on the lakes, usually is the best. It has the lowest carbon footprint, so it's the most environmentally friendly. It's the safest. It's usually the most economical, depending on your locations. And so, if we can sort of find our niche in Indiana of moving containers into the heartland of the country, into the greater Chicago market by water in what would be the lowest carbon footprint, we're having shippers tell us that they're picking their ports, they're picking their logistics, their supply chain based on the lowest carbon footprint. That could be a real advantage for us that could help Indiana grow container shipments into the Midwest. And I think there's another story to be told on the export side with agricultural products as well.
Yeah. So you've talked about obviously getting all the way across into the Great Lakes, but explain the route a little bit more. I mean, it's the St. Lawrence Seaway area, all that, but
Sure.
yeah, take us through the geography a little bit more.
Yeah. So ocean ships can go through the St. Lawrence Seaway, and then they go through a series of locks to essentially climb up through our Great Lakes. You don't think about this, but if you look at sea level at being about here, you have to climb a ship. You know, a 700-foot ship has to climb roughly 60 stories to get to Lake Michigan.
Wow.
And that, you think of what, the tallest towers in Indianapolis are about that high. So you think of what the engineering that goes into that. So there's a series of locks where a vessel comes in as they have to go around Niagara Falls. You remember navigating some of those elevation changes. It's go into a chamber, they pump in water to lift up the vessel, and they go through. So they start those locks in Montreal. So you're going to take the St. Lawrence River into Montreal, and then you're going to go through the Great Lakes and around Michigan to get to Burns Harbor. So it is amazing that shipping channel exists. But one of the challenges is the ship size is limited. You can't do the largest ocean vessels through that system because of the lock chambers I mentioned. They have to be a certain size to fit in that, and the locks are also closed during the winter months for maintenance. And so,
Okay.
even though there may not be major ice cover on the lakes, the locks still need to be shut down for maintenance. So it's very difficult to maintain. If you're a supply chain person, you don't just take 3 months off in the winter. And
Right.
so we have to, for instance, steel coming into our port might go by rail for 3 months. And so we would do box cars from, let's say, Baltimore for part of the year. And then we do ocean vessels in from Europe for the other part of the year. So it's a real mix. Our geography is pretty special because we're at the end, if you think of the Great Lakes as a major corridor, we're at the back door. So you have Montreal, Quebec at the gateway, at the opening, and then we're at the back door that connects into the inland river system. So we're at a very important nexus, if you will, between the Great Lakes and the inland river system. So we can even if vessels can't get to us for 3 months, we can handle barges year round at all of our ports. And we're going into a partnership with Port of Chicago and Port of Milwaukee to do a study on how we can expand trade between the Great Lakes and the inland river system. I'm not sure the ports of Indiana and Chicago have ever partnered on anything in our history, but so this will be kind of a fun adventure for us to work together to try to grow business for the greater region.
So it's nice at least that to set up the idea of the international port with containers and everything, that part of the passage is already sort of taken care of. You already know what's happening there in terms of getting from the Atlantic all the way into Indiana.
Yeah, so it'll be fun to see, as we explore opportunities for growth on the Seaway and the Great Lakes. Um, Containers, really offer a major, um, let's say, economic benefit for the region. But it's going to be difficult to see if this is something that takes off right away through the St. Lawrence Seaway, or whether it's the seasonality and the geography and the limitations on structures is going to be, let's say, a bridge too far. So it's going to take a lot of work. I think that one thing I didn't bring up, um, I think the other side of this that's really interesting is we have the Indiana corn and soybean growers that are pushing hard for better container service. And that is not something we had contemplated going into this. And so it's been really a wonderful partnership that we've discovered together, in that we're trying to get federal approval to bring containers in. But if you think of any supply chain, it has to have a backhaul. It has to be two-way, or it's too expensive.
Right.
And so the same time we're trying to get federal approval to bring in containers, the State Department of Agriculture, the Indiana corn and soybean growers, these groups have been working really hard to figure out how to get better container service for outbound Indiana products. And corn, specialized corn, soybeans. So they've informed us Indiana has a premium product when it comes to soybeans. We have a higher protein content in our soybeans, which makes them more valuable. But typically, when Ports of Indiana is handling soybeans, they're going in bulk. They're going into they're dumped into a barge or into the hold of a vessel, and you're mixing Indiana soybeans with beans from various locations. And so you lose that premium component. But if you can ship it in a container, be it through the St. Lawrence Seaway, or we could even talk about barges, now you're getting that identity preserved shipment. So that container can be filled at the farm, where it came from, you can track it all the way to destination. So it will create an opportunity for Indiana's agribusinesses to start getting a premium for some of the products that they've been selling every day. It's just in a different way of packaging and different way of shipping through our maritime channels, that really will create this new opportunity for Hoosier farmers.
Yeah, interesting. You don't think about stuff like that,
Right.
that usually. Yeah. But it makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned the sustainability factor. Obviously, yeah, if you can cut another big chunk of travel out that might have been a truckload, which is a lot higher emission, get to the middle of the country. And then you also have access to a lot of intermodal rail track and everything in this area. So that really, if you do that combination of the ocean liner all the way into rail, you're cutting out a lot of emissions.
Mhm. Yeah. So barge transportation in particular, it really compares itself to the other modes, not from a competitive nature, but just it's out of sight, out of mind. I think a lot of people think, hey, I'm going to ship my cargo, across country. I'll just call a truck and away it goes. And that's usually, that's the majority of how freight moves. But if you start to sort of look at economies of scale, you could put 70 truckloads in a barge. And barges don't move by themselves. They're tied to a towboat, and the towboat's going to push them along the river. When you do a tow, it's usually 15 barges, and on the Mississippi River, it might even be more than that. So if you are thinking of freight moving up and down the Ohio River, you might have 15 barges being pushed by one towboat. That's 1,000 truckloads of cargo, and it's being just motored down there by one vessel, one person steering that. You don't have 1,000 drivers. You don't have 1,000 trucks on the highway. You don't have the congestion. If traffic accidents are certainly very different. We are on the inland river system. You just don't have a significant amount of accidents or safety issues that you do on the highways. And so there are a lot of benefits to maritime transportation. But it does, it's not going to go everywhere. We go where our network goes. And so, we are extremely efficient from river to end of river to end of river, end of lakes to end of lakes. But we have to partner with the other modes Our ports don't work without rail. Our ports don't work without trucks. So it's a balance of using the right mode for each leg of a trip. And I think that's the key, is that if we can sort of, in Indiana, we have the ability to tie to pretty much all the railroads in the country, and we have as many highways as any other state. So we're really at a unique position to be able to provide freight connections for businesses in all different types of different sections of our economy, from high tech to low tech to steel production to grain. So it's really interesting to see the types of businesses and the types of cargoes that utilize our ports.
So, Jody, in our market, it's been tough, I would say, for the past 2 years or more, just in FAK cargo kind of supply chain. How has that impacted what you see? Because you kind of have a unique solution currently today in different type of cargo, but then also what with this new containerization and all these new services that you're putting together, we're hopeful that things are picking back up and on the upswing. So how are you kind of preparing for that? Because that seems like those all tie in together as regular FAK cargo starts to increase. You're going to have all these new solutions. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's so from our world, we may not be right on the edge of maybe the latest trends. We're looking farther out, so our ebbs and flows are a little less sudden, I think, than a lot of people in the freight industry. For instance, we're regardless of today's problems, we're building for the future. We're building 5 years out. We're because our capacity is, what we do every day is we build a dock, or we build a rail yard, or we build a new bridge. And those things obviously don't happen overnight. And we're not doing it based on, the Baltimore situation where you've got a port shut down. We're just not responding to those kinds of things that quickly. But what we do see is significant growth in our key market sectors. And we have the opportunity as a port to go get federal dollars to support that growth. And that's been a relatively new trend in the past, let's say 10 years. We had not chased federal grants. There are some little economic development grants here or there, but about 10 years ago, we got serious in looking for federal dollars to start expanding our ports. Because people don't know this, Ports of Indiana, well, we're created by the state. We don't receive any funding from the state. So we are self-funded in our operations. And we would generally only go to the state if we're going to open a new port, or we're going to build some major capital project that is going to create jobs, and like you would any other sort of incentivized project. But day-to-day operations, we're on our own. But we go when we have a major project that's going to create public benefits. We go for federal dollars for either USDOT, the MARAD administration, EPA had a Clean Ports program recently. And so we are now completing about $60 million worth of grant projects at our 3 ports. And so that's how we're reacting to change and preparing for the future, is expanding our capacity, creating more multimodal connections. I think a lot of what we do on a day-to-day basis is eliminating those choke points, those obstacles, that pain points that you run into. And for many years at Burns Harbor, our issue was we didn't have enough rail capacity. We didn't have sorting yards. And so we just completed construction of 2 rail sorting yards and storage yards at that port. We're working on another one at Mount Vernon right now, and we just applied for a $16 million grant for that one. And we're working on one at Jeffersonville that's related to, we just finished up the Tiger grant, and we're going to be looking at a possibility for intermodal projects down there. So our reaction time may not be the swiftest, but it's kind of like we're steering a tanker here. We're not going to make sharp turns, but we're gonna get in the right direction over the long term, and really make sure we're planning for the future growth that we see coming down the road.
Well, I think to Shelley's point too, it looks like there could be a confluence of the timing, the long term planning happens to be working out towards maybe everything's going to be up and running at a point when the market starts to be hopping a little bit more as well.
Yeah, and we also don't mind being the instigators of market change. We are happy to be the troublemakers, if you will. That's maybe a little bit of a twist in how we've operated in the last 18 months. Um, Typically, business development for Ports of Indiana meant you answer the phone when somebody has an idea and they want to invest in your port. You help them do that, and that's great. We're happy to do that. The change we've taken on in the past year and a half is we have brought the projects to the market. We've brought the concepts to our customers and said, hey, what if we buy that building and you buy that building and we grow this together? Or why don't we do a joint venture and we'll invest in the capital, you provide the operations, and we share in the revenues. So we've done about 4 of those projects now, where we have 2 joint ventures in terminal operations. We've opened a new railroad, and we're opening a new railroad and dock service here in the coming weeks. So it's that kind of, we're willing to spur local. We can do local things. We're not going to affect the big market. Obviously, we're not going to start a increase in global container trade, but on a local basis, if we can partner with the right companies, maybe that's a growth for Indiana. Maybe that's a growth for Burns Harbor or Mount Vernon or in the greater Evansville area or Jeffersonville. So we think we can be market movers in those areas just by instigating a little trouble here and there.
You mentioned Antwerp Bruges, the agreement there. How are you finding in terms of talking to others about like the interest in joining up with Ports of Indiana?
Yeah, it's I think everyone, there's 2 different levels of joining up. There's the, hey, we need your letter of support and help us go get approval or funding, bring in equipment. And then there's, when we talk to the customer, it's okay, what's my cost and when can I deliver my box? And we're like, whoa. We're not open until 2026. So we think we'll be up and running in 2026, and we can start having those real conversations about, hey, here's how we move your cargo. But it is absolutely chicken and the egg here. We have to do both. We have to build a facility without knowing what the future of it's going to look like, and we have to engage customers and have those dialogues of, here's what that freight movement is going to be when it's ready. So we have to move on both fronts if we're going to stand this up from essentially nothing. There are no containers moving. We're not growing something. We have to build this up from basically an empty dock today. But what we're seeing is that if we look at some of the macro trends and just geography in general, is the Great Lakes is best suited as a trading partner with Europe. And that's where our typical trade patterns happen. We do a lot of steel there. We do grain. We do a variety of steel related products. So if we look at that market, Antwerp Bruges is the 2nd largest container port in Europe and 13th largest in the world. So right off the bat, that was a good place to start. So it's already our natural trading partner. We're already doing other products, bulk and break bulk, your general cargoes. So can we just add one more thing to that? I think that's a nice, quick evolution. It's easy to do that. You're not rerouting things around the globe. The other piece that we looked at is, well, who are our biggest trading partners? And if you think of import exports and you look at the dollar value, exports, we send the most to Canada. Not a big surprise. We just about 13 billion a year, I believe, in exports to Canada. But then you look at the import side and you would think Canada, Mexico, maybe China. Our biggest import partner is Ireland. And it's, we were 13 billion in exports to Canada. We're actually $18 billion a year in imports from Ireland. And so, that gets us thinking a little bit. What is that? And it looks like a lot of pharmaceuticals move in that sector. You've got Eli Lilly and some of the others that move products, have big manufacturing operations in Ireland, and also obviously headquartered here in Indiana. So we see some potential synergies there, potential for refrigerated cargoes. We have to figure out our niche on the Great Lakes. It's not just, we're not going to be the cheapest. We're not going to be the fastest. We're not going to be the biggest. It's got to be a specialty service. So it could be a white glove type service for refrigerated cargoes or food products or pharmaceuticals. We've also toyed with the idea of maybe ours is a greener service, a green glove service, if you will, where you're offering the lowest carbon footprint from A to B from your biggest trading partners. So I did go to as soon as we found that out, I happened to be going to Ireland, and I did go visit the ports in Ireland. and there is strong interest in. They're looking to grow cargo just like everybody else, and they already have a direct service to the U.S. So they're already moving shipments from Ireland into the U.S. And so that's something we're going to explore, and I think maybe be able to develop further partnerships with the ports in Ireland as well as others in Europe.
So, do you have at this point sort of an idea of what success looks like in, say, 5 years, where you want to be? I mean, obviously, you mentioned 2026 is when this next stage is going to be starting to really be ready to go. But what you're looking at, down that road?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. What does the future look like for ports of Indiana? I think right now I would paint a very optimistic picture of new container shipments, regular service. That's going to be a real challenge. It was kind of funny when we were talking to customs. The officers came to visit our port and talk with us about it, and they had been through our application and kind of seen our projections, and we were very modest in our projections and conservative, but one of them asked the question, what if you got just, if all this cargo is moving into Chicago, what if you just got 1% of the East Coast traffic moving into Chicago? And I said, whoa, wait a second. We could not handle that. That's, it would be very exciting. And, it makes you think, man, that there's some real potential here. But at the same time, I think we have to be sort of reasonable in our approach to growth. If it takes off, great. That would be wonderful. But I think we'd love to see, a handful of vessels coming every year. There's a very big difference, in a container vessel coming into the East Coast might be carrying 24,000 TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units of containers. So one coming in to the Great Lakes might only be doing 1,000. So there's a very different scale there. But I think we're optimistic on starting up a container service is just half the battle. Growing it will be the next steps. So we'd like to see that take off at Burns Harbor. We did an interesting project at Burns Harbor related to the U.S. EPA Clean Ports program. And, typically, I think most ports around the country were working on coming up with ways to reduce diesel emissions by changing the fuel type of a vehicle or maybe going electric. We kind of came at it a different way. We actually came up with a proposal, and our port team did, that was to remove the vehicles altogether. So rather than trucking things from one side of the port to another all day long, why don't we just use electric conveyors to replace the diesel front loader, the diesel truck, the other diesel front loader that's at the other end. So we are able to eliminate about 28,000 miles of diesel moves within our port with this proposal. Now we'll wait and see if it gets approved, but it's that kind of new thinking that I think we need to modernize what we do. We need to look for ways to be both more competitive economically and more environmentally friendly in what we're able to accomplish at the ports, because there are always better ways to do things, and we're going to be exploring to see what those are and how we can bring it, a combination of partnerships with our companies, our customers, and the federal funding programs that are out there, make it a very interesting time to invest in ports.
One more question on the Chicago piece. So you mentioned, obviously, there had been a need to work with Chicago to get to this level of permission, and there's some collaboration now going on as well. So how do you think that has evolved to the point where this is happening, and what do you see as that supplemental role for the ports of Indiana to work with Chicago going forward?
Yeah, so I just clarify that the approval for us to do containers at Burns Harbor is from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Office in Chicago, which is different from the Port of Chicago. So
Right.
It's a federal agency. The Port of Chicago is a quasi-state organization, a port authority like ours, much smaller in scale, smaller staff, but a great team. We enjoy them. I think we compete on some products, some cargoes, but there are certainly, around the Great Lakes and the inland river system, there's this feeling that rising tide, lifts all boats. And so we're certainly in this together, trying to grow business both for our region, but also for the inland waterways and the Great Lakes. What's really challenging in our industry is that we have aging infrastructure throughout the system. So some of our locks have exceeded their design life expectancy. There's some that are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, and they need federal funding to maintain their operations, both on the inland rivers and the Great Lakes. And so that is a place where we work with Chicago, Milwaukee, ports on the inland river system. I mean, there's a long list of partners at the Inland Rivers Ports and Terminals and the American Great Lakes Ports Association that come together in these types of discussions and really, put competitive nature aside and let's work together to make sure that our system is working. Because if the system doesn't work, then all the ports are going to be shut down. So critical that we get federal funding across the board, both on the lakes and on the rivers.
Great. So where can people go to find out more about Ports of Indiana and this initiative?
Generally, go to our website, portsofindiana.com. It's our resource for all things ports. Also, we have a special container section that's kind of digging into our initial. We're just getting started here. Just keep in mind, we've approved our initiative in June. We had our customs approval a few weeks later. In July, we signed an MOU with Antwerp Bruges. And so we're on a fast track to make this happen. So give us a minute to get the website updated, but it's all there.
There's new stuff on there every day, though, really. Yeah,
exactly. It's you got to keep up. It's fast. I would say, just for people, especially in Indianapolis where we are, it's worthwhile to go look at our ports. To go to Lake Michigan, go to the Ohio River, see the barges, see the ships. It is not something you see every day. And it still strikes me. I've been in this organization 23 years, and I'm still excited to see an ocean vessel parked at our dock in Indiana, 500, 600 miles away from the ocean. It's just amazing how our system is able to move these vessels and keep our economy going.
Great. Jody, thanks very much for joining us. And maybe we'll have to check in a little bit down the road when this is even further along.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, ports in Indiana, ocean ports in Indiana.
I know. I learned something new every day. It's amazing to hear. And he's so excited about it. The evolution of what's going to occur and how that can kind of tie in with other things in the future. It was exciting.
Yeah, I mean, and he brought up the barge piece as well, which I think people just don't think about anymore. But there's barges moving up and down the rivers in the U.S. and they can carry some cargo too.
A lot.
Yeah. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see as the container piece comes along in a couple of years, how that impacts things supply chain wise, and we're close enough that we might be able to see them a little bit.
I know. I think we should do that tour. I think that'd be fun. Yes.
So again, we appreciate having Jody on to discuss Ports of Indiana, and we'll have links in the description to find out more for yourselves as well. As we mentioned, the website is updating with there's a lot of new information coming in every day, so definitely something to follow. And we also appreciate you following us on whatever podcast platform you consume this podcast from, whether you're watching or listening. You can find us on any of those platforms, and you can find our website at www.intekfreight-logistics.com for more about what we do. And if you'd like to email us, podcast@inteklogistics.com works great for that as well. And going back, subscribe, follow, comment, like, review, rate, anything you'd like to do. We appreciate that as well. Shelly, thanks very much.
Thanks, Kevin.
And we'll be back next time with another episode.